The grandfather clock in the corner of the living room chimed precisely 8 p.m. Its steady, cold ticking echoed through the stuffy air of the small kitchen in the modest, single-story ranch house in the suburbs. The smell of a burnt casserole, mingled with the lingering odor of grease from an old, grime-caked range hood, created an atmosphere so thick it was hard to breathe, making one instinctively furrow their brow. Grace stood silently by the sink, her long hair tied back in a low ponytail with a frayed velvet scrunchie. She wore a simple, light blue blouse, its sleeves rolled up high to reveal her slender arms, wet with soapy foam as water trickled from the faucet into the stainless steel basin. Drip, 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 the sound was strangely desolate. In the middle of the dining table, covered with an unfashionable, floral-patterned vinyl tablecloth, a white envelope bearing a company logo sat conspicuously, highlighted by the pale, fluorescent light overhead. Inside was $25,000 in cash, the award for Employee of the Year that Grace had just accepted on stage that afternoon. The thickness of the crisp new $100 bills was enough to make the eyes of those sitting around the dinner table light up. Yet, contrary to the pride that should have filled the room, the air was thick with tension, stretched as taut as a violin string about to snap. Eleanor, Grace's mother-in-law, sat with her legs crossed on a hard wooden chair, her sharp eyes, like razor blades, fixed on the folded edge of the envelope on the table. Jessica, her sister-in-law, a woman of about 34, scrolled aimlessly through her phone, but occasionally shot a sideways glance at her sister-in-law, her look filled with scrutiny and envy. At another corner of the table, Kevin, Grace's husband, kept his head bowed low over his plate, his chopsticks mechanically picking at his food. He dared not lift his head to look at his wife even once. Suddenly, a shattering crash ripped through the silence of the house. Eleanor had slammed her ceramic dinner plate down on the table. White shards flew across the linoleum floor, one piece grazing the back of Kevin's hand, leaving a thin, bloody scratch. Her voice, sharp and venomous, hissed out each word. "What did you say? You get a $25,000 bonus and dare to send $20,000 straight to your parents. Is this house just a transit station for your money? You get a $25,000 bonus and give $20,000 to your parents. If that's the case, then just get a divorce." The room fell instantly silent. Even Kevin's ragged breathing seemed to stop. Water from the kitchen faucet continued to drip, drop by drop, into the chillingly quiet space. But what happens when a woman who has endured a lifetime of mistreatment suddenly decides to follow the malicious suggestion to just get a divorce? Grace turned off the faucet. Her hands, soaked and cold, were wrinkled from being in the water for so long. She grabbed a thin towel, dried her hands, and slowly turned around to look directly into the furious, bloodshot eyes of her mother-in-law. Grace's voice was low and caught in her throat, but it did not tremble in the slightest. "My father was just rushed to the hospital for emergency bypass surgery. That money is my bonus, earned from my sales figures, from countless sleepless nights of my own sweat and tears. I sent it to save my father's life in his most critical moment. I also left $5,000 to cover all of our family's living expenses for this month." "What is wrong with that?" Eleanor scoffed, a broken, contemptuous sound escaping from between her teeth. "Wrong. You came into this family, you eat this family's food, you sleep in this family's bed. Everything you earn must first and foremost be dedicated to building up your husband's home. Your own parents have their own son and daughter-in-law to care for them when they are sick. When you are married off, you are like spilled water. How dare you take the Johnson family's money to provide for outsiders?" "The Johnson family's money?" Grace smiled faintly, a bitter, pained smile. "For the past 6 years, from the grocery money, the electric bills, the water bills, to the tuition for your 2 grandchildren, has there been a single expense not withdrawn from my bank account? You call that the Johnson family's money? Are you daring to talk back to me?" Eleanor slammed her hand on the table with a loud bang and shot to her feet. She pointed a finger straight at Grace's face, the veins in her neck bulging. "You ungrateful daughter-in-law, thinking you're smarter than your elders. Kevin, are you blind? Open your eyes and look at your wife. She's walking all over your mother." At that moment, all eyes in the room turned to the only man present. Kevin flinched, his shoulders hunching. He lifted his bloodshot eyes, avoiding his wife's sharp gaze, and stammered, waving his hands in the air. "Honey, just apologize to Mom. It's not a big deal. You suddenly sent such a large sum of money home without telling anyone. Of course, Mom is upset. Honey, call your parents and ask them to send the money back. We can discuss later how much we can help them." Kevin's words were like a bucket of ice water poured directly onto Grace's bleeding heart. 10 years of her youth dedicated to him, 8 years of living together under one roof. The man she once called her husband, who had once promised to shelter her from every storm, was now forcing her to take back the money meant to save her own father's life, just to appease his mother. Jessica, the sister-in-law who had been silently scrolling on her phone, now slowly put her device down on the table, a mocking pout on her lips. "Grace, Mom has a point. You're a daughter-in-law. You should know your place. You go out and earn money, but Kevin has to manage the household so you can focus on your career. Now you've taken all the money. What if Kevin gets sick tomorrow, or Mom falls ill? Who will pay for it? Your calculations are so clever, but our family is the only one losing out." Psychological abuse never comes from clenched fists, but from the cruel irrationality of those who call themselves family. Grace didn't bother to argue anymore. She realized that any explanation was meaningless to minds already programmed with selfishness. She didn't cry either. The choked-back tears had flowed inward, solidifying into a hard, sharp block of ice. She took slow steps toward the dining table and knelt on the cold linoleum floor. Her pale fingers carefully picked up each sharp shard of the broken ceramic plate. A pointed piece cut her index finger, drawing a bead of blood, but Grace felt no pain. The invisible agony in her heart had completely numbed all physical sensation. She silently threw the shards in the trash, picked up the empty envelope from the table, turned her back, and walked straight into the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. That night, a thick darkness enveloped the small house. The silence was so profound, you could hear the buzzing of a mosquito by your ear and the whistling of the wind through the cracks of the decaying wooden window frames. Grace tossed and turned, unable to sleep. The feeling of injustice burned like a toxic, smoldering fire, tearing at the depths of her soul. Around 2 a.m., she gently turned the doorknob and stepped out barefoot, intending to go to the kitchen for a glass of warm water to soothe the bitter tightness in her chest. As she passed the slightly ajar wooden door of her mother-in-law's room, Grace suddenly froze. Inside, the dim yellow light of a night lamp was still on. The rustling of papers echoed in the quiet night, accompanied by Eleanor's whispered but calculating voice. "Just let her be. Let her cry for a few days, and everything will go back to normal. You tell Kevin to ignore her. Absolutely no comforting. She's a good earner, brings in a steady $5,000 a month. Why would I be stupid enough to let her divorce him for real? You have to scold her to make her scared, so she knows her place and keeps working hard. Without her carrying this family, where would we get the money to pay off that debt for you and your brother?" Jessica's voice, shrill and anxious, cut in. "But Mom, you were too harsh today. What if she gets desperate and does something rash? What if she actually files for divorce? The loan sharks are about to show up at my company and cause a scene." "She wouldn't dare," Eleanor hissed, her voice filled with smug confidence. "This house is in Kevin's name. She'd walk out of here with nothing. Her father is on his deathbed. What would she live on? Don't you worry. That spineless turtle will never escape my grasp." Grace stood rooted in the dark hallway. Her hands clenched her nightshirt so tightly the fabric wrinkled. So, in their eyes, she had never been a person, never a wife or a daughter-in-law who deserved to be loved. She was just a money-printing machine, a perfect tool for them to exploit down to the bone marrow to cover up their dirty secrets. A cold, soulless smile crept onto Grace's dry lips. The darkness hid her eyes, now completely devoid of tears, the eyes of a woman covered in wounds. She slowly turned and quietly returned to her bedroom, In the deepest corner of the particle board wardrobe, a small safe containing all the financial documents proving the flow of money for the house purchase in 2016 lay dormant, waiting for the moment to expose the truth. The hushed whispers from the partially closed door were like poison needles stabbing directly into Grace's eardrums. She stood frozen on the cold tiled floor, the chill from her feet spreading up her spine, numbing her senses. The dark hallway was lit only by the faint yellow glow from Eleanor's room. The acrid smell of a cheap mosquito coil mixed with the musty odor of the old house created a suffocating atmosphere that choked her lungs. She's a good earner, carrying this family. Loan shark debt. The fragmented words swirled in Grace's mind. She pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a choked sob. For 6 years, she had gritted her teeth and endured, tolerating her mother-in-law's biting remarks, all for the sake of being a dutiful daughter-in-law. She had thought that with enough patience and dedication, even a stone would soften one day. But no. It turned out that in the eyes of the Johnson family, she was never a person of flesh and blood with feelings. She was nothing more than an ATM, a workhorse bought to plow through and carry the pile of garbage her mother-in-law and her children had hidden. Loan shark debt? What had Jessica and Kevin gotten into? Why were they so terrified at the mention of her filing for divorce? A series of questions flashed through Grace's mind like lightning tearing through the night sky. Suddenly, a cold, bitter smile formed on her lips. The humiliation and injustice she felt earlier that evening when Eleanor threw dirt in her face had suddenly evaporated, replaced by a terrifying clarity. Eleanor's demand for a divorce during dinner was just a bluff, a cheap psychological trick to intimidate her into handing over the entire bonus to fill their black hole of debt. Were they afraid of her leaving? They were afraid of losing the only life raft for their sinking family. Grace turned around, her steps no longer heavy and defeated. She gently pushed open the bedroom door. The dry hinges let out a small, mournful creak. The pale moonlight streaming in from the window illuminated Kevin's sprawled form on the sagging mattress. He was snoring softly, the carefree sound of a coward. The comforter was kicked to the foot of the bed. The tiny scratch on the back of his hand from the broken plate had a small, dried speck of blood on it. A ridiculous sight. Grace crossed her arms, standing silently at the foot of the bed, staring at the face of the man she once called her husband. 8 years of sharing a bed. 8 years she had shouldered the expenses, scrimping and saving every penny so he could wear a decent suit to work like his peers. She had felt sorry for him when he complained about work pressure, so she took on extra projects, working overtime until her eyes blurred, just so he wouldn't have to worry about money. And what did she get in return? His cowardly silence, his face buried in his rice bowl as his mother insulted his wife. His deceitful concealment of some mysterious debt with his greedy sister. The more she looked, the more contempt churned within her, like waves crashing on the shore. She didn't feel pain anymore. She felt disgust. A man who couldn't protect his own woman, who even colluded with his family to drain her dry, what was the point of keeping him? Grace didn't wake Kevin up to confront him or cry. Arguing now was the act of the weak and uncontrolled. She was past her impulsive 20s, where she would scream for justice at every turn. Justice is never given by those with malicious intent. Justice had to be seized with her own hands. She turned and walked towards the corner of the room, where the particle board wardrobe stood, its veneer peeling in several places. The strong smell of mothballs hit her nose. Grace knelt on one knee, reached out, and pulled open the bottom drawer. She pulled out a pile of old winter sweaters, tossing them onto the floor. In the darkest corner, a small, gray steel safe appeared, cold to her touch. Grace took a deep breath, her eyes shining in the darkness. She placed her hand on the electronic keypad and firmly pressed the numbers. The 6-digit passcode was her own father's birthday, the man currently struggling for life in a hospital bed, the only person in the world who loved her unconditionally, yet whom she had neglected for this wretched family. Beep, beep, beep. With each sound, her heart beat stronger, more determined. Clack, the solid steel lock disengaged. Grace grabbed the handle and pulled the safe door open. The dim light from her phone screen illuminated the contents inside. There were no gold rings, no expensive jewelry, only a thick file carefully wrapped in a waterproof plastic bag. It was 2016, the year she and Kevin decided to buy this house. At the time, Eleanor had boasted to the entire neighborhood that her talented son had bought a house in the city for his wife. Kevin had also smugly accepted the compliments, posturing as a strong family pillar. But what was the truth behind that glamorous facade? Grace pulled out the file, placing it carefully on her lap. She flipped through the pages. The deed was in both their names, but tucked right behind it was a stack of yellowed bank statements. Every transfer, every cash deposit receipt, every loan disbursement document, all of them bore the name Grace Miller. 80% of the value of this house was paid for with her premarital savings and money she had borrowed from friends and colleagues. Kevin had only contributed a minuscule amount from his severance package from his old job, a mere token to have his name on the deed for appearance's sake. The black and white proof was right there. Bank transaction histories never lie. Yet, for all these years, they had brainwashed her, indoctrinating her with the mantra, Kevin's house, the Johnsons' house. Grace's hand caressed the edge of the deed, her fingertips tracing the sharp, printed letters. A perfect plan for retaliation began to form in the mind of a woman at the bottom of a well of despair. They had treated her like a tool. Well, she would show them the price they would pay when that tool turned against its masters. "You want to take my money to pay your debts?" Grace whispered into the silence, a chilling smile on her lips. "Let's see who will be the one walking out of this house with empty hands." She carefully put the documents back, holding the file tightly to her chest. Tonight, the war had only just begun. The dim light from her phone's flashlight illuminated the faded print on the yellowed documents. Grace sat on the cold linoleum floor, her legs crossed, spreading each bank statement out in front of her. The surrounding darkness seemed to thicken, leaving only the sound of Kevin's oblivious, even breathing from the sagging mattress and the chirping of crickets outside in the small garden. 2016. 8 years had passed. 8 long years she had been caged in this prison called her husband's house. Grace ran her index finger over a payment order stamped with the bank's bright red seal, $250,000. That was the total value of this single-story house at the time. Grace's eyes welled up, not with sorrow, but with a smoldering anger that was burning away the last vestiges of affection she had forced herself to maintain. She remembered those struggling days of tightening her belt like it was yesterday. Over $200,000 of that amount was her own savings from before she was married, plus loans from relatives on her side of the family that she had to work her fingers to the bone, skipping meals to pay back with interest for the first 3 years of their marriage. At the time, Kevin was a low-level employee with a meager salary, contributing a paltry sum of less than $50,000 from his severance package. Yet, when it came time to sign the papers, Eleanor had insisted that her son's name be on the deed as well, for the sake of appearances with relatives, saying that husband and wife, though two, were one. Eleanor's shrill voice echoed from the past, ringing in Grace's ears like a scratch on a vinyl record. "Oh my son is so capable. Right after getting married, he bought a house in the city. My Grace really hit the jackpot. She's lucky to have married my Kevin." She had paraded this story all over the suburban neighborhood, painting her son as the perfect family provider. And Grace, the one who shed blood and tears to pay off the debt, was conveniently cast as the lucky freeloader. She had endured it. She had once thought that, in a marriage, what's mine is yours, and there was no point in keeping score. But tonight, after overhearing the dirty secret from her mother-in-law's room, the deed bearing both their names suddenly seemed nauseatingly ridiculous. 80% of the money for this asset came from her. Marriage and family law was very clear. Assets acquired during marriage are considered joint property, but if there is evidence proving a disparity in contribution, upon divorce, one has the right to request the court to divide it according to effort. Grace clenched her jaw, her determination hardening. The power of the truth made her hands stop trembling. She carefully took her phone and took clear pictures of every statement, every receipt showing transfers from her personal account to the sellers. This was her talisman, the sharpest blade to sever the cancerous tumor that had been growing for the past 8 years. She put the papers back in the safe and locked it. A dry click echoed, locking away a past of humiliation and opening a battle she was determined to win. The next morning, the pale autumn sunlight streamed through a gap in the coarse fabric curtains, illuminating half of Grace's weary face. She had been awake all night. The dark circles under her eyes were prominent, but her gaze was sharp, alarmingly lucid. She got out of bed, tied her long hair into a neat bun with a plastic clip, and opened the door. Outside on the porch, the sound of Eleanor sweeping the brick patio with a broom echoed. She deliberately swept hard, knocking the broom handle against the legs of chairs and tables, a clear warning to her rebellious daughter-in-law, who had dared to talk back the night before. Grace went to the kitchen. The broken dishes had been cleaned up, but the gloomy, heavy atmosphere still clung to every corner of the house. She silently turned on the gas stove, boiled a kettle of water, and made herself a cup of strong, black coffee. There was no bustling breakfast service for her husband, no sweet greetings to please her mother-in-law. Grace's silence now carried a strange, overwhelming power. Kevin staggered out of the bedroom, looking groggy, yawning widely. His t-shirt was wrinkled and askew. Seeing his wife's indifferent attitude, Kevin's steps faltered. He glanced around, cautiously approached the dining table, and pulled out a creaky wooden chair to sit opposite Grace. Kevin cleared his throat, his hands clasped together, fidgeting nervously. "Honey," he began, his voice soft and timid. "About last night, Mom has a temper and said some things she didn't mean. Your family. Don't hold a grudge. It's not worth it." Grace didn't answer. She lifted her coffee cup and took a small sip. The bitter taste slid down her throat, prompting a faint, ironic smile. Seeing that his wife wasn't reacting as explosively as usual, Kevin felt emboldened. He pulled his chair closer, trying to put on a sincere expression, and gently admonished her. "I know you're worried about your dad's surgery, but you took the whole $25,000 and then suddenly announced you'd sent $20,000 home. Mom has a reason to be angry. Money's been tight lately. How about this? The remaining $5,000 you said was for living expenses. Just give it to Mom. Consider it a gift to help her cool down. Let's just have some peace in the house. I'm stuck in the middle, and it's really hard for me." The air seemed to freeze. The ticking of the wall clock echoed again, methodically measuring the cowardice of the man before her. Grace placed her coffee cup on the table. The bottom clinked against the glass surface with a sharp, clean sound. She looked up, her eyes as still as a winter lake, but beneath the surface lay sharp, hidden icebergs. She stared directly into Kevin's wavering pupils, her voice even, neither high nor low, but carrying the weight of 1,000 pounds. "For peace in the house, or to cover the loan shark debt that you and Jessica are drowning in." Kevin flinched as if struck by lightning, his body stiffening. The color drained from his face, turning from a healthy pink to a deathly pale white. His eyes widened, his lips trembled, and he stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence. What are you talking about? What debt?" Grace leaned forward slightly, tapping her index finger rhythmically on the glass tabletop. She spoke slowly, each word clear and cold. "That $5,000, I transferred it this morning to cover my father's hospital bills. From this month on, you and your family can pay for your own gas, buy your own groceries, and figure out how to pay your own debts. The ATM named Grace Miller in this house is officially out of service." Kevin sat frozen in the creaky wooden chair, his eyes wide as he watched Grace's straight back disappear out the door. His throat was dry and bitter. He couldn't utter another syllable. The sudden exposure of the truth had turned the man, accustomed to hiding behind his mother and his dutiful wife, into a lifeless wax figure. Grace didn't bother with his pathetic state. She slung her worn leather handbag over her shoulder and walked calmly out the door. The sound of the iron gate latch clicking shut was dry and sharp, as if definitively closing the door on 8 years of blind submission. On that early autumn morning, the cool air caressed her skin. Grace walked along a sidewalk littered with fallen leaves, finding a secluded park bench hidden behind a large, old tree near her company's parking lot. She sat down, smoothed her low ponytail, and took her phone out of her bag. The screen lit up. Grace stared at the name Mom in her contacts, her finger trembling slightly, hesitating for a few seconds before she finally pressed the call button. The ringing dragged on, each tone tightening her chest. Finally, the line connected. A click mixed with the chaotic background noise of a regional hospital. The sound of hurried footsteps, the wail of an ambulance siren, and the cold, steady beep of a heart monitor were all audible as her mother's frail, intermittent voice came through. "Hello? Grace? Honey? It's me." Just that simple, fragile greeting, like a thin thread in the wind, was enough to bring down the wall of fortitude Grace had been building since last night. A sting filled her nose, and her eyes burned, but not a single tear fell. Her tears of self-pity had long since run dry, exhausted on sleepless nights worrying about her wretched in-laws. "Mom, how's Dad? What did the doctors say about the surgery last night?" Grace asked quickly, forcing her voice to be calm and steady so as not to worry her elderly mother further. Her mother coughed a few times, her labored breathing audible through the phone. "Your father is out of the woods, dear. The doctors said they operated just in time to remove the necrotic part of his stomach. He's in the ICU now, but—" "Grace?" Her mother's voice suddenly dropped, filled with concern and pity. "Where did you get so much money? Suddenly sending $20,000. Did you and your husband discuss such a large amount? Did Eleanor give you a hard time? Your father and I are old. Life and death are fated. Don't subject yourself to being scolded and mistreated by your in-laws just to take care of us, okay?" Grace's heart felt as if it were being pierced by 1,000 needles, painful, bitter, and aggrieved. While her parents were on the brink of death, their primary concern was still whether their daughter was being mistreated by her in-laws. This was a stark contrast to the greedy parasites lounging in a bed bought with her money, who only schemed to extract every last cent from her to maintain their false pride. "Mom, don't worry about it," Grace said, taking a deep breath, her voice now clear and firm. "That was my bonus from the company, my own hard-earned money. I have every right to decide how to use it. No one in my husband's family said a thing. Kevin agreed to let me take care of you and Dad. Just focus on getting better. Buy nutritious food, milk, the best medicine for Dad. If you need more, I'll send it. Don't spare any expense. You hear me?" She had to lie. A lie to give her parents peace of mind, to let them sleep soundly. She bit her lower lip until it bled, suppressing a sigh that was welling up from her chest. After ending the call, Grace let her hands fall to her lap. She looked up at the canopy of green leaves, catching a sliver of sunlight peeking through. The limit of her endurance had been officially broken. She could no longer sacrifice her youth and drain her energy to be a launchpad for ungrateful people. Grace sat up straight, her face taking on a cold, determined, almost ruthless expression. She unlocked her phone and opened her mobile banking app. The familiar blue interface appeared. Grace tapped on card management and quickly scrolled down. The screen clearly displayed, "Supplementary credit card, cardholder, Kevin Johnson." For years, to save her husband's face in front of his friends and colleagues, Grace had gritted her teeth and gotten him a supplementary card directly linked to her salary account. His drinking sessions, his coffee meetings, all of it was paid for by her. She then swiped to the automatic payment section. A line in bold red caught her eye. "Car loan payment, 15th of every month, amount, $850. The used sedan that Kevin drove to work every day, which he always boasted about buying himself, was in fact a financial handcuff clamped tightly around Grace's wrist. "It's time to put everything back in its proper place," Grace muttered to herself. Her finger moved coolly and precisely across the screen. Select Cancel Automatic Transfer. The system asked, "Are you sure you want to cancel?" Grace pressed. Confirm. Next, she went back to Kevin's supplementary card management. Without a moment's hesitation, she tapped the red lock icon. A warning popped up. The card will be temporarily locked and cannot be used for any transactions. Do you agree? Grace pressed. Agree. A green checkmark appeared, signaling the successful operation. From this moment on, the parasitic tentacles of that family had been officially severed. Grace put her phone away, stood up, straightened the collar of her blouse, and walked towards the office building. Her demeanor was no longer that of a submissive wife, but of a warrior preparing for a great battle. A few hours passed. At exactly 12 p.m., while Grace was in a meeting reviewing the quarterly sales report, her phone, lying on the glass conference table, began to vibrate intensely. BZZ, BZZ. The screen lit up, displaying a push notification from her banking app. Payment transaction of $325.50 via supplementary card XXXXXX failed. Reason: card has been locked. 5 seconds later, the screen flashed again. This time, it was a text message from Kevin's number. Grace, what the hell are you doing? Why is my card locked? I'm out to lunch with business partners, and my card got declined when I tried to pay. It was humiliating. Unlock my card right now. Now. Grace stared at the demanding, irrational text from her husband. She didn't reply. She turned the phone face down on the table, a contemptuous smile forming on her lips. Take your time and enjoy it, Kevin. The economic drama is just beginning. The phone's ringing stopped, leaving a chilling silence in the glass-walled conference room. 12:15 p.m. The harsh sun cast sharp stripes of light through the aluminum blinds onto the gray carpet. Grace shoved her phone, now flooded with Kevin's angry texts, into her handbag. She straightened her collar and walked briskly to the elevator. There was no time for sentimentality or pointless arguments via text. Every minute, every second, was now meticulously calculated for a much larger game. A taxi pulled up in front of an imposing office building on a bustling downtown street. Grace stepped out, her heels clicking decisively on the granite steps. A polished brass plaque read, Miller & Associates, Attorneys at Law. Stepping through the heavy glass doors, the sweltering heat and city smog were instantly replaced by the deep chill of the central air conditioning. The space was filled with the subtle, calming scent of lemongrass essential oil, quiet and dignified. Hello, Miss Miller. Attorney Miller is waiting for you in conference room 3. The receptionist smiled professionally, gesturing towards a red-carpeted hallway. Grace nodded and walked forward. The heavy wooden door swung open. Seated behind a massive desk piled high with thick files was a man in his 50s. Metal-rimmed glasses sat low on his nose, exuding an air of calm and sharp intelligence. Please, have a seat, Attorney Miller said, pointing to a brown leather sofa. I've reviewed the documents you emailed me this morning. Let's get straight to the point. Grace sat down, her back perfectly straight. She opened her handbag, took out a neatly stapled file of original documents, and placed it carefully on the glass coffee table. Here are all the bank statements from 2016 with official stamps, proof of transfer, and a copy of the house deed. Grace's voice was clear and cold, devoid of any emotion. As I explained, the house is in both our names, but 80% of the purchase funds are proven to have come from my personal premarital account and loans that I alone was responsible for repaying. I want to sell this house immediately. Attorney Miller picked up the documents and flipped through the pages. The rustling of paper, a steady rhythm in the quiet room. He frowned, pushed up his glasses, his eyes showing a look of admiration for the astonishing prudence of the woman before him. According to sections 33 and 59 of the current marriage and family law, Attorney Miller began slowly, his voice deep but carrying the weight of legal authority. Assets acquired during the marriage are by default considered joint property. However, the principle of a 50-over-50 split takes into account the effort contributed to creating and maintaining that asset. With this ironclad evidence, if we take this to court, Your chances of winning the majority value of the house are 99%. But, Grace interrupted, her fine eyebrows knitting together slightly. How long would the legal process for a property dispute in court take, counselor? 3 months, 6 months, or a year? That is the core issue. Attorney Miller nodded, placing the file back on the table. If your husband intends to be difficult, deliberately fails to appear for summonses, or repeatedly files appeals, the case could be dragged out for 1 to 2 years. During that time, the asset will be frozen, and all transactions will be prohibited. You will be stuck in a legal quagmire, exhausted and mentally drained. And from my observation, you are not someone who wishes to be entangled with that family for a minute longer. A sharp glint appeared in Grace's eyes. She clasped her hands together, squeezing so tightly her knuckles turned white. Exactly. She couldn't wait years for a court to decide. She wanted to cut out this cancerous tumor immediately. She wanted Eleanor and her children to feel the sting of losing everything overnight, just as they had ruthlessly exploited and trampled on her dignity for the past 8 years. So, is there a way for me to legally expedite the sale of the house and get the money without going to court? Grace asked, her eyes burning with resolve. Attorney Miller smiled slightly, the knowing smile of a seasoned hunter. He leaned forward, lacing his fingers together on the desk, and lowered his voice. There is one way. You must get your husband to voluntarily sign 2 documents at a notary's office. First, a postnuptial property agreement, clearly stating that 80% of the asset belongs to you. Second, the purchase and sale agreement for the house with a third party. With both of these voluntary signatures, the transaction is completed in an instant, fully protected by law. Voluntarily, Grace let out a bitter laugh. He's a weakling who does everything his mother says. Eleanor would rather die than let go of this golden goose. How could I possibly force him to voluntarily show up at a notary? That's why I need more information from you, Attorney Miller said, tapping his metal fountain pen on the wooden desk, creating a series of calculated clicks. People only walk willingly into a trap when they're cornered. You mentioned he was texting you angrily this morning about the locked credit card. And last night, you overheard that he and his sister are in debt to loan sharks. Grace was startled. That's right. They were desperately trying to get my bonus money to plug that hole, but I've cut off all financial aid. Excellent. Attorney Miller's eyes lit up. He pointed his pen directly at Grace, emphasizing each word. This is your husband's Achilles heel. Weak-willed individuals in debt to loan sharks are often in a state of extreme panic. They fear being publicly shamed by gangsters. They fear their mother finding out and scolding them. And they fear losing face with colleagues. Once you've turned off the financial spigot, he's like a drowning man. The lawyer paused for a beat, a sharp smile on his face. You don't need to argue. You just need to throw him a poisoned life raft. You will proactively suggest selling the house to save him, to pay off his debt, and to keep the whole matter a secret from his mother. In his panicked state, with debt up to his eyeballs, he will almost certainly jump at the chance and agree to sign the sale documents to get some cash. By the time he signs the 80/20 property agreement at the notary's office, the tables will have officially turned. Grace was stunned, her chest heaving. A jolt ran down her spine, awakening her mind. The plan was flawless. Use Kevin's own fatal weakness as leverage, forcing him to dig his own grave while thinking he was being saved. I understand. Grace stood up abruptly, a sharp smile on her lips. Thank you, counselor. Please draft the property agreement for me. I'll personally take it to set the bait. Outside the glass window, the midday sun was still glaring. But inside Grace's heart, a cold blizzard was about to sweep through the Johnson family, blowing away all their arrogance and selfishness into the deepest abyss. The afternoon sun cast long, pale, yellow streaks through the dusty wooden window frame of the living room. The ceiling fan creaked as it turned, cutting the air with a tired, disjointed rhythm. Grace sat silently on the worn, torn leather sofa, sipping a strong cup of lotus tea. The delicate floral scent was a stark contrast to the suffocating, stuffy atmosphere that permeated the house. Since Grace had declared a complete financial cutoff, Silence had become the most terrifying weapon in this home. Eleanor no longer shouted and cursed, and Kevin came home late and left early, moving about like a hollow shadow. Suddenly, the screech of a scooter's brakes echoed from the brick patio. Clack. A figure burst into the house without knocking. It was Jessica. The 34-year-old sister-in-law was wearing a tight, floral print dress and carrying a cheap knockoff designer handbag, reeking of a nauseatingly strong, cheap perfume. Jessica took off her oversized sunglasses, glanced around the empty living room, then pulled out a chair and plopped down opposite Grace. "Hey, sister-in-law, it's the weekend, and you're just cooped up in here? Where's my brother Kevin?" Jessica crossed her legs, her voice sickeningly sweet, forcing a flirtatious smile onto her brightly lipsticked lips. Grace slowly set her teacup down on the glass table. "Where your husband is and what he's doing, since when did that become my business to report to you?" Grace's cold, indifferent reply made the smile on Jessica's face stiffen, but she quickly regained her usual brazen expression. Jessica smacked her lips and leaned forward, adopting a conspiratorial whisper. "Geez, you're so sensitive. You know I respect you the most in this family, but listen. The tension in the house these past few days has been too much. Mom's old, and her blood pressure is high. She was so upset about the money incident the other day that she couldn't sleep all last night, just sighing and worrying about her son." Grace smirked. "Is that so? As her devoted daughter, have you bought her any supplements or made her any herbal tea?" Jessica choked for a second, then quickly changed the subject, her eyes shining with unconcealed greed. "Never mind that. It's her emotional health that matters. I've been thinking, even plates and bowls clash sometimes, let alone a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. You're the eldest daughter-in-law, the one who earns the money. You should humble yourself a bit for the sake of peace. How about this? Next weekend, you sponsor a family trip to Las Vegas for all of us. Consider it your apology to Mom for hiding the bonus money." I did a quick calculation. Flights and hotel for the four of us would only be around $3,000 or $4,000. It would be a good way to clear the air, strengthen our bond, and give me a chance to de-stress. Don't you think that's a reasonable plan? The silence was so profound you could hear Jessica swallow. Grace lifted the ceramic teapot and slowly poured more hot water into her cup. The clear stream of water flowed steadily, as serene as her own state of mind. It was a demand so shameless it was laughable. Her own father was lying critically ill in a regional hospital. Every dollar she sent home was life-saving medicine, and yet, this 34-year-old, able-bodied sister-in-law had the gall to come here and demand she cough up money for a family vacation as an apology. Grace looked up, her gaze as sharp as a scalpel, cutting straight through Jessica's heavily powdered face. She spoke in a calm, quiet voice, but each word landed like a slap. 34 years old, Grace drew out her words, her rhythm slow but sharp. "I thought perhaps your romantic life was unlucky, that you were single at this age. I assumed you would have at least learned to be independent, to know your place. But it turns out you came to visit not to bring a fruit basket and ask about my father's emergency surgery, but to present a vacation invoice for Mom to collect on. Where did you learn such a cunning trick, using a noble gesture as a front for your own gain, Jessica?" Jessica's face turned beet red, the flush spreading from her neck to her ears. Her two sore spots, her parasitic lifestyle and her single status had been hit. She bristled like a porcupine and slammed her hand on the glass table. "Grace, don't you dare go too far. You think just because you earn a little money, you can look down on this family? Let me remind you. You live here as a Johnson daughter-in-law, so you better know your place. If my mother gets sick from this, can you bear the consequences?" "Consequences?" Grace laughed out loud, a clear but chilling sound that sent a shiver down the spine. "Everyone bears their own consequences. As for being a daughter-in-law, I'm sorry, but being a decent human being is my priority. You love your mother so much. You feel so sorry for her. Why don't you use your own money to show your filial piety? The knockoff clothes you're wearing, the cheap perfume you're spraying that chokes everyone, why not skip a few bottles of that and buy your mom a plane ticket to Las Vegas? Using someone else's hard-earned money to do good deeds for yourself? That's called robbing Peter to pay Paul, dear. Every word from Grace was like a poisoned needle piercing through Jessica's thick skin. She didn't scream. Grace used her extreme composure to suffocate her opponent. Civilized cruelty is always the most fearsome weapon, stripping away all pretense and leaving the enemy with no room to retaliate with reason. Knowing she couldn't extort any money and had been humiliated to the point of having nowhere to hide, Jessica flew into a rage and shot to her feet. The wooden chair scraped harshly against the tiled floor as she shoved it back. You just wait. Let's see how long your arrogance lasts. Don't think you're in control." Jessica shrieked, her eyes bloodshot. She hastily grabbed her handbag from the table and fumbled to put her phone inside. The clumsy, forceful movement caused the bag to open wide, and something slipped from a zippered pocket, falling to the floor. "You selfish, cruel witch!" Jessica spat one last curse before stomping out of the house. Vroom! The scooter engine roared to life, leaving behind a cloud of gray smoke and the oppressive silence of the late afternoon. Grace didn't bother to chase after her. She leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. This petty argument was nothing compared to the storm that was coming. Suddenly, her eyes caught sight of a crumpled pink slip of paper lying under the glass coffee table. It was the paper that had just fallen from Jessica's handbag. Grace slowly bent down and picked it up. It was a thin carbon copy with faded black print. She carefully smoothed out the wrinkles. As she glanced at the heading, her pupils instantly constricted. Her heart skipped a beat. Easy cash and collateral. Below the bold gangster-style lettering were the details of a short-term, high-interest loan. Loan amount: $50,000. Collateral: original title for a sedan. License plate 30F, XXXX. The exorbitant interest rate was scribbled in messy handwriting, and the thing that made the blood in Grace's veins freeze was not the $50,000 figure, but the shaky, sprawling signature in the borrower's section, Kevin Johnson. Outside, the sky began to darken. The pale yellow light from a street lamp cast a half-smile, full of menace, on Grace's face. The coward's fatal weakness had finally revealed itself. The flimsy pink receipt lay in Grace's palm, but its weight felt like 1,000 pounds of lead, heavy enough to shatter the fake facade of a happy family she had painstakingly maintained for 8 years. The faint, acrid smell of cheap ink rose from the paper, mixing with the dim, yellow light from the streetlight outside the alley. It all created a scene of ultimate irony: $50,000, an exorbitant interest rate, and the clear signature of Kevin Johnson in the bottom right corner. The shaky, messy handwriting clearly revealing the panic of a desperate borrower. Grace stood motionless in the middle of the living room. Darkness had swallowed the corners of the old, single-story house, leaving only the sound of the pendulum clock ticking away, dry and indifferent. She smirked, a cold smile as sharp as a razor flashing across the face of a woman who had just passed her 35th birthday. The anger and humiliation from the previous night had completely evaporated, replaced by a strange, exhilarating satisfaction that ran down her spine. The cat was finally out of the bag. But a single pawnshop receipt wasn't enough to be the perfect game-changing weapon. Grace needed more concrete evidence. She needed to know exactly what black hole they had thrown that enormous sum of money into. Taking silent, barefoot steps on the cold, tiled floor, Grace headed straight for the small study next to the staircase, a space Kevin often used to work in the evenings, the perfect size for him to escape household chores. On the cluttered particle board desk, the old iPad that the couple shared lay dormant. Grace knew her husband's lazy, careless habits. He rarely logged out of his social media accounts on shared devices. Grace pulled out the chair and sat down, swiping the screen. The 6-digit passcode was entered smoothly. Eleanor's birthday. How pathetic. Even his personal security code had to cling to his mother's presence. The screen lit up, casting a ghostly blue light on Grace's still face. She quickly scrolled through the apps, her fingers stopping on the Telegram icon, the highly secure messaging app Kevin had been glued to recently. As soon as she opened it, a flood of unread messages popped up. The first thing she saw was a group chat named VIP Bitcoin Moonshots. Right below it was a private chat between Kevin and Jessica, time-stamped less than 2 hours ago. Grace tapped on the conversation. The words appeared, starkly revealing the ignorance and boundless greed of these two so-called intellectuals. Jessica had texted Kevin, "The easy cash guys just called and screamed at me. This month's interest is $5,000. They said if we don't pay up by the 20th, they're going to come and splash red paint all over my company's entrance. You need to figure something out. That coin we bought dropped by 90%. The account is completely wiped out. We can't recover it." Kevin's replies were a series of frantic, desperate, fragmented messages. "I'm trying to figure it out. Just don't panic. It's so hard. Grace found out I was using the supplementary card and she locked it. This morning I tried to sweet-talk her into giving me the rest of the bonus money, and she just shut me down. Mom doesn't have any money. If she finds out I pawned the car title, she'll kill me." Jessica pushed further. "So, what do we do now?" "I went over earlier to try and trick Grace into giving us money. Told her we should all go on a trip to Vegas and then we could use that money for the interest. But that witch is too smart. She humiliated me. You're her husband. You have to use your authority to make her give up the money. She has a safe in her room. I bet she has more cash hidden away." Reading the words "that witch," Grace's pupils suddenly constricted. She let out a soft, faint sigh, filled with utter contempt, while she was tightening her belt, calculating every penny for groceries, while she was tossing and turning at night, worrying about her father's hospital bills. Her dear husband and his precious sister were throwing tens of thousands of dollars into an invisible digital casino. They had used the car and asset bought with her money but in Kevin's name to secure a loan from loan sharks. And when they lost everything, they schemed to come back and drain her, targeting the bonus she had earned with her own sweat and tears to cover their mistakes. A pair of high-class parasites, nothing more. Grace exited the app and turned off the iPad screen. The room plunged back into thick darkness. She wasn't angry. Fury was now an extravagant and unnecessary emotion to waste on people who were not worthy of being called human. Instead, a surge of absolute control was coursing through her veins. Attorney Miller's advice from that afternoon echoed in her mind. You don't need to argue. You just need to throw him a poisoned life raft. Yes, that life raft was now firmly in her hands. Grace stood up and walked calmly towards the master bedroom. She turned on the small night lamp in the corner. The soft yellow light spread, casting her long shadow on the white plaster wall. She pulled out a chair and sat down at her vanity. In contrast to Kevin's mess, Grace's little corner was always neat and tidy. She carefully placed the pink pawn shop receipt right in the center of the glass tabletop. She smoothed out its wrinkles with her long, slender fingers. To ensure this deadly weapon wouldn't be blown away, Grace took a cone-shaped glass perfume bottle, the only gift Kevin had ever given her, back when they were newlyweds, now empty, and placed it firmly on the edge of the paper. Everything was perfectly arranged. A psychological trap had been set, silent and still, but with enough destructive power to shatter the last defenses of a weak-willed man. Grace leaned back, crossing her arms, her gaze fixed on the slightly ajar bedroom door. The clock struck 9 p.m. creak. The rusty iron gate outside screeched as it was pushed open. It was followed by the sound of heavy, dragging footsteps on the brick path. Not the usual quick, arrogant stride, but the steps of someone who had just survived a near-death experience, utterly exhausted. The bedroom door slowly creaked open. Kevin entered. His usually gelled hair was now disheveled and plastered to his forehead. His white shirt was wrinkled, damp with sweat, and covered in road dust. His eyes were sunken, laced with red veins, darting around like a cornered animal. When his gaze fell upon Grace's calm, serene figure, as still as a winter lake, sitting at her vanity, Kevin flinched. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing with difficulty. You're still awake?" Kevin stammered, his voice hoarse and shaky, echoing weakly in the quiet room. Grace didn't answer. She didn't even blink. She slowly raised her arm, her slender index finger pointing directly at the glass tabletop in front of her. Kevin's eyes involuntarily followed her gesture. Under the dim glow of the night lamp, the pink pawn shop receipt, held down by the glass perfume bottle, was clearly visible. The words easy, cash, and collateral, and the bright red figure of $50,000 were like sledgehammers crashing down on his head. In that instant, all sound in the world seemed to be sucked away. The scene froze. The blood drained from Kevin's body in a fraction of a second. His legs turned to jelly, trembling uncontrollably, unable to support him. His already haggard face went deathly pale, as white as a soulless corpse. The game of hide-and-seek was officially over. Kevin's legs trembled violently, completely losing their strength. His knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the cold, tiled floor with a heavy, dry thud. The body of a man well over 6 feet tall was now crumpled and pathetic, like an earthworm crushed under a boot. Kevin's lips twitched, his bloodshot eyes filling with tears. He looked up at Grace, his gaze pleading and utterly spineless. Grace remained motionless in her chair, her legs crossed, her slender back resting lightly against the chair back, her hands clasped elegantly in her lap. There was no screaming, no cursing, no tears of utter disappointment like a normal wife would have upon discovering her husband had pawned a family asset. Grace's silence was like the calm before a great storm, a silence that suffocated her opponent. The sour smell of sweat mixed with road dust from Kevin's wrinkled clothes wafted up, a stark contrast to the gentle scent of rose perfume emanating from her neat vanity. The contrast starkly delineated their positions. One held the power of life and death. The other was gasping for air, awaiting judgment. "Grace, honey, I'm sorry," Kevin sobbed, his voice broken and thick with fear. "I was wrong. I was stupid. I listened to Jessica. She convinced me to invest in crypto, said we could double or triple our money in no time, but we lost it all. Honey, the loan sharks from Easy Cash, they're calling, threatening to kill me, to splash red paint all over my company entrance." Kevin crawled forward on his knees, his rough hands reaching out to grab the hem of his wife's shirt, but Grace leaned away slightly, pulling her leg back. It was a decisive, dismissive movement filled with disgust and contempt. Kevin's hand grasped at empty air before falling limply to the floor. $50,000. Grace repeated the number, her voice even and thin, but as sharp as a razor's edge. "You took the car, an asset I've been breaking my back to make monthly payments on, and pawned it to throw money into an online casino. Now that you've lost it all, what are you going to use to save your own skin? My hard-earned bonus money? No, I wouldn't dare. I swear I wouldn't touch your money again," Kevin pleaded, bowing his head to the floor, tears and snot smearing his pale face. "But you have to save me. If Mom finds out about this, she'll kill me. Grace, please, for the sake of our 10 years together, have mercy on me. You're the smart one. You can figure this out. If you can just get me through this. I swear I'll be your loyal servant for the rest of my life." Grace blinked slowly. It was time to throw the poisoned life raft. She leaned forward, took a tissue from the box on her vanity, and gently tossed it onto the floor for Kevin. This act of charity was calculated to perfection. Grace's voice suddenly dropped, becoming strangely soft and gentle. "Being my servant won't solve anything. Get up. Crying here isn't going to make the loan sharks forgive your debt." Kevin shakily pushed himself up, but his legs were still weak, so he ended up sitting on the edge of the sagging mattress, his hands clutching his thighs, waiting. "You know," Grace sighed, perfectly playing the role of a resigned wife trapped by circumstance, "I sent all my bonus money home for my father's emergency surgery. I only have a few thousand left in my savings account for the whole family's living expenses. $50,000, plus the insane interest from those loan sharks. Where are we going to find that much cash in 3 days to get the car back?" Hearing this, Kevin buried his head in his hands, despair groaning in his throat. "Then I'm dead. They won't spare me. My reputation at work will be ruined. But it's not entirely hopeless." Grace's soft words were like a lightning bolt in the dark sky. Kevin's head shot up. His eyes, like those of a drowning man spotting a log, lit up. What is it? Save me. What's the way? Grace slowly turned the glass perfume bottle on her vanity. Her calm gaze was fixed on her husband's hopeful face as she uttered each word slowly. We sell this house. Sell the house? Kevin stammered, recoiling slightly, his face contorting again. But this is where Mom lives. She's so proud of this house, tells everyone you bought it yourself. If she finds out we're selling it to pay off a gambling debt, she'll go crazy. It's not an option, honey. Grace smiled faintly, a benevolent, fake smile that masked the bone-deep chill flowing through her veins. She tilted her head, whispering the sweetest, most poisonous psychological manipulation into Kevin's ear. You're being silly. Who said we're selling it to pay off a debt? We bought this house in 2016. The property values in the suburbs are skyrocketing. If we sell it, we'll have more than enough to pay off your debt and rescue Jessica. With the huge amount left over, we can buy a luxury condo closer to the city, in both our names, to make it official. You can just tell your mom that we've been doing well financially and want to upgrade to a bigger, more modern place for her to enjoy in her old age. Isn't that a perfect solution? Your mom gets to be proud of her son for buying a new home, and you get to quietly erase your debt. The only people who will know about the loan sharks are you, me, and God. We keep it a secret from your mom. Grace's every word flowed into Kevin's ears like a powerful painkiller. For a coward like Kevin, who feared his mother and was obsessed with his public image, being cornered, and then suddenly offered a perfect escape route that solved the problem while preserving his dignity, was an offer he couldn't refuse. Kevin's mind was a blur. He didn't question why his wife, who just last night was being threatened with divorce by his mother, was now so forgiving and self-sacrificing, willing to sell her home to cover his mistakes. The primal fear of the loan sharks and the desire to live had completely paralyzed his already weak critical thinking skills. Kevin looked at Grace as if she were a living saint. Tears streamed down his face, but this time they were tears of immense relief, the tears of a man who had just been pardoned from death row. Grace, are you serious? You'd really sell the house to save me? Kevin's voice trembled with emotion. Have I ever lied to you? Grace replied softly, her gaze unwavering. But selling the house requires both our signatures at a notary's office. We don't have much time. I'll have a real estate agent come over tomorrow to appraise it. You'd better pull yourself together and not let Mom get suspicious. Kevin nodded profusely, his disheveled head bobbing up and down as he muttered a stream of thank yous and promises. He was completely blinded by the illusion of escape before him. The coward had no idea that behind his gentle wife's smile was an invisible noose that had just been tightened. He had just willingly placed it around his own neck, blissfully unaware, thinking he was boarding a rescue ship. The afternoon sun was blazing, the dry autumn heat beating down on the mossy brick patio, raising a musty, earthy smell characteristic of the time-worn house. The last of the summer cicadas buzzed incessantly, their drone mixing with the rattling of the fan from the living room. The rusty iron gate let out a piercing squeak, shattering the quiet atmosphere. Grace entered the yard, followed closely by a man in his 40s. He was dressed in a loose, brown silk suit, had a sparse beard, and fanned himself with a frayed paper fan in his left hand. In his right, he clutched a brass compass intricately engraved with patterns. To any observer, he looked like a reclusive, venerable feng shui master. In reality, he was Tom, one of the most successful real estate agents in the suburban area, hired by Grace to appraise the house's true value under a perfect disguise to deceive her mother-in-law. Hearing the strange noise, Eleanor scurried out from the kitchen. She was wearing a worn-out linen house dress, fanning herself with a palm leaf fan to ward off the oppressive heat. As soon as she saw the stranger, her sparse eyebrows knitted together, her sharp, scrutinizing gaze sweeping over the uninvited guest from head to toe. Grace, who did you bring home? Why are you bringing some spiritual guru here to perform some nonsense ritual? Eleanor demanded, her shrill, bossy voice echoing with authority. Grace calmly took off her high heels and placed them neatly on the shoe rack. She remained unfazed, a gentle, polite smile on her lips, But her words struck right at her mother-in-law's weak spot, her pride. "Please calm down, Mom. This is Master Thomas, a famous energy consultant from the city. Kevin's business has been a bit shaky lately. He was tossing and turning all last night and told me to invite a master to check the energy flow of our property to see if anything is being disturbed. I wouldn't dare be negligent when it comes to my husband's career." Hearing the words career and Kevin, Eleanor's attitude did a complete 180. Her greatest concern in life was the future of her precious son. She cleared her throat, trying to suppress her usual sharp tone, but her inherent arrogance was still on full display. "Oh, my Kevin is just worrying for nothing. Master, you should know, my son bought this house himself back in 2016. This land is prosperous. It faces the direction of wealth. Since moving here, my son has been promoted and has made our family proud. It's not some random piece of worthless dirt that needs measuring." Tom, in his role as the master, stroked his chin. A real estate professional's eye immediately scanned everything from the ceiling structure and the quality of the load-bearing walls to the size of the yard. He spun the compass in his hand, the needle whirling before he spoke in a slow, deep, mystical tone. "The venerable lady speaks the truth, but prosperity or decline cannot be seen with the naked eye. The land is well-shaped, but if the house is in a man's name while the feminine energy is overpowering, wealth will flee." Eleanor beamed at this remark. She shot a sideways glance at Grace, thinking the master was alluding to her rebellious daughter-in-law who dared to hoard her bonus. She added triumphantly, "The master is so accurate. If there's a petty, secretive person in the house hiding money for themselves, how can good fortune ever stay? Please, master, examine it carefully for my son. If we need to knock down a wall or place a charm somewhere, I'll have it done." Tom smirked inwardly. He began to walk around the house, muttering incomprehensible incantations and counting on his fingers. But in reality, he was calculating the value of every square foot of land, every tile on the wall. He stopped in front of a long crack in the living room wall and tapped it a few times. This is water energy erosion. A cracked wall is a sign of a fractured family. Moreover, Tom squinted, pointing his fan towards the dark hallway leading to Kevin's room, his voice suddenly dropping to a spooky whisper. "Ma'am, have you noticed a chilling draft in the house lately? This is a harbinger of encircling debt. Someone is suffering financial losses, getting entangled in legal troubles, and may even be at risk of getting involved with loan sharks." Eleanor jumped. Her heart pounded in her chest. Financial losses. Loan sharks. Those words hit her vague fears about recent strange phone calls right on the mark. The color drained from her face. She stammered, swallowing hard. "Master, you must be joking. No one in my family is involved in such things." "You must be mistaken." "Mistaken or not, time will tell," Tom said calmly, folding his fan, his sharp gaze sweeping over Eleanor's panicked face. "The energy doesn't lie. A dark star is shining directly on the master of the house. The only way to resolve it is to completely refresh the energy of this land." With that, Tom gestured for Grace to step outside to the porch, using the excuse of needing a family member's birth date to set up an altar. He left Eleanor standing frozen in the living room, her face ashen, her mind in turmoil from the psychologically damaging predictions. She had no idea that every word the master spoke was fed to him by Grace to pave the way for a plausible reason to sell the house. Once they were in the empty yard, Tom immediately dropped his solemn act. He took a notebook from his silk jacket, scribbled a few numbers, tore out the page, rolled it up, and stuffed it into Grace's hand. His voice was a whisper, but professional and crisp, carrying the sound of clinking coins. "The lot is a good shape, no zoning issues. They're about to open a new road at the end of the block that connects to a main street. Real estate in this area is booming. My client is looking to buy outright to build a small apartment complex. Lady, you've hit the jackpot." Grace carefully unrolled the small piece of paper. The numbers, hastily written in blue ink, jumped out at her. In 2016, the house was bought for $250,000. Now, The number on the paper was $450,000. The property value had nearly doubled. It was an enormous sum, more than enough to crush Kevin's pathetic $50,000 debt and build a new empire for herself. Grace clenched the paper in her hand. She slowly looked up at the bright sky, a radiant, triumphant, and utterly ruthless smile on her lips. The trap was set. Now, all that was left was for the prey to willingly take the bait. In the days following the performance by the energy consultant, the atmosphere in the small house fell into an eerie silence. It was not peace, but the dead calm before a Category 5 hurricane. Kevin now walked on tiptoes and spoke in whispers, skulking around like a mouse stealing rice. He was counting the minutes until Grace could close the deal with the agent and sell the house to save him. Meanwhile, Eleanor was completely oblivious to the undercurrents swirling at her feet. Seeing her daughter-in-law silent for days, leaving early for work and returning late, locking herself in her room, she felt smug. In the narrow-minded view of a woman accustomed to dominance, Eleanor was convinced that Grace was scared. She believed that the authority of a mother-in-law, combined with her threats of divorce, had successfully broken the rebellious spirit of her stubborn daughter-in-law. On Sunday morning, a gloomy autumn drizzle fell, casting a gray veil over the mossy brick patio. Grace, dressed in a sleek black business dress with a light jacket draped over her arm, was about to leave. She had a meeting with Tom, the real estate agent, to finalize the payment plan with the buyer. Just as she slipped on her high heels, a shrill, sharp voice, like a saw cutting through metal, echoed from the living room. "Grace, take off those shoes and get in here. I need to talk to you." Grace paused and slowly turned around. On the worn leather sofa, Eleanor sat enthroned, her legs crossed, sipping from a teacup. Beside her, Jessica was filing her nails, occasionally throwing a triumphant, provocative glance at her sister-in-law. Grace walked closer, stopping a few feet from the coffee table, her eyes as calm as still water. "You called for me, Mom? I'm in a hurry to get to the office for something. Office business? Or sneaking money to your family?" Eleanor slammed the teacup down, the porcelain clattering loudly. "You've been quiet as a mouse these past few days. Did you think that was the end of it? I've been too lenient with you, and now you think you can walk all over this family. You took a $50,000 bonus, secretly sent $40,000 home, and you won't even give up the remaining 10. Do you think the Johnson family is your personal hotel?" Grace tightened her grip on her handbag. The same old demand for money. Human greed was truly a bottomless pit. Seeing Grace's silence, Eleanor pressed her advantage. She shot to her feet, pointed a finger directly at her daughter-in-law's face, and declared her cruel new house rules. "From now on, to prevent you from hiding money, you will hand over your salary debit card to me. I will manage this household's finances. Every morning, I will give you $20 for gas and lunch. That's more than generous. And another thing," Eleanor held out her veiny hand in front of Grace, her tone dripping with autocratic command. "Hand over your set of house and gate keys. A married woman has no business dressing up and going out on a Sunday instead of serving her husband and cleaning the house. From today, when you come home from work, where you go, who you see, you will have to ring the doorbell and report. I will open the door for you. No more acting on your own. Suffocating." Grace's chest felt crushed by a heavy stone. Every cell in her body screamed to flip over the coffee table, to throw the stack of bank statements proving her $200,000 investment in their faces. This was no longer a family. It was a prison, a blatant trampling of a human being's dignity and basic freedoms. They wanted to turn her into a destitute, dependent in the very house built with her own sweat and tears. From the kitchen, Kevin peeked out. He knew his mother was being unreasonable, knew that Grace held the evidence that could throw them all out on the street, but the coward pulled his head back in, staying silent, letting his wife face the fire alone. He was afraid that if he intervened, he would ruin the secret plan to sell the house and save him from the loan sharks. It was Kevin's ultimate cowardice that helped Grace regain her necessary composure. A wave of calm washed over her, extinguishing the smoldering fire of her anger. She lowered her gaze. "Yes, The master plan was almost complete. She couldn't let a moment of pride derail it now. She needed a strategic retreat, a feigned submission to lull the power-hungry wolves. Grace slowly reached into her leather handbag. The clinking of metal echoed in the tense room. She pulled out a heavy keyring with keys to the gate, the security door, and the wooden front door. Clack. The keys landed on the glass coffee table, right in front of Eleanor. "Here are the keys, Mom," Grace said, her voice surprisingly steady and obedient, without a hint of protest. "As for the debit card, the company is issuing me a new one at the beginning of next month because I lost mine. I'll bring it to you then." Eleanor was stunned for a second, then a look of ultimate satisfaction spread across her wrinkled face. She triumphantly snatched the keys, clutching them in her palm like a queen's scepter. Jessica pouted, filing her nails more vigorously, and let out a sarcastic chuckle. "See? You just have to be firm with her. Have a safe trip, sister-in-law. Remember to come back early to cook dinner. Without keys, you'll be waiting outside in the rain." "Yes, ma'am." Grace turned and walked steadily out the door, leaving behind the cackles of the triumphant mother and daughter. But as soon as the iron gate closed behind her, the submissive smile on Grace's face vanished, replaced by a cold, bone-chilling pride. Her eyes scanned the peeling outer wall as she calculated the time. She had willingly handed over the keys? Yes, because she no longer needed them. One only needs keys to enter their own home. For a house that was about to be sold, with new owners arriving with a contract demanding the premises be vacated in 72 hours, what was the point of keeping a few rusty pieces of metal? Let Eleanor cling to her illusion of power, because when she woke up, she wouldn't even have a roof over her head. The corner cafe, hidden behind a row of red-leafed trees, was quiet, submerged in the pouring autumn rain. Soft, instrumental music played intermittently from an old, dusty speaker in the corner. The smell of burnt, ground coffee mixed with the damp air wafting through the glass door, creating a thick atmosphere, completely isolated from the bustling traffic outside. Grace sat at the most secluded table, her slender hands, calloused from years of household chores, rhythmically swirling a hot latte. Condensation dripped down the side of the glass onto the cold tabletop. Gone was the submissive, overworked figure from the greasy kitchen. Grace now exuded a cold, sharp, almost intimidating aura. Her eyes were still, lost in logical calculations, like a chess grandmaster arranging the board for the final checkmate. Clack. The glass door was pushed open. Tom, the real estate agent who had posed as the dignified energy consultant, had shed his brown silk suit for a neatly tucked-in striped shirt. He stepped inside, shaking the rain from his umbrella, and hastily pulled out the chair opposite Grace, plopping down. He was breathing heavily, his forehead beaded with sweat despite the cold outside. "The client's committed," he whispered, slapping his hand on the table, unable to hide his excitement. "A big shot in the seafood import-export business. He's paying 100% cash. No third-party brokers, no bank loan to drag out the appraisal process. And most importantly, no haggling. They need the land to build an office building and are on a tight end-of-year deadline." Grace showed no excitement. She slowly lifted her coffee and took a sip, her sharp gaze sweeping over Tom's sweaty face. "What's the final closing price?" Her voice was even and clear. $475,000, Tom swallowed, his eyes shining. "This client loves the corner lot location. They said as long as the title is clean, no liens from a bank, they'll go straight to the title company and sign the same day. The money will be wired to your account in an instant. This is a golden goose, lady. If you don't say yes now, they'll move on to another property." In this struggling economy, selling a property for nearly $500,000 in cash was as rare as finding gold. A normal seller would be profusely thanking the agent. But Grace was different. She set her cup down, her index finger tapping a slow, dry rhythm on the glass table. The tapping blended with the sound of the rain outside, creating an invisible psychological pressure. "I agree to that price," Grace said, her voice low and commanding. "But I have 2 mandatory clauses that must be written into the purchase agreement addendum." Tom frowned, confused. What other clauses? A VIP cash buyer is a rare find. Don't start making unreasonable demands. If you offend them and they back out, we all lose. It's not about the price. Grace cut him off, her eyes flashing with a cold light. First, immediately after the contract is signed at closing and the full 100% payment is transferred to my account, the buyer assumes full and immediate legal ownership. No exceptions. Tom nodded. That's standard. The law dictates that. They know that already. Second, Grace leaned forward, her hands clasped, enunciating each powerful word. This is the crucial part. I require the buyer to bring a construction crew to measure, take possession, and clear the premises immediately. Specifically, no later than 72 hours after the closing. What? Tom's jaw dropped, his eyes wide as if he were looking at an alien. 72 hours? 3 days? Are you insane? Usually, after selling a house, people ask the buyer for a month or two to find a new place and pack. Your house is full of furniture. Your mother-in-law and sister-in-law are still living there. If you sign the sale and the buyer immediately sends a crew to kick them out, it's going to be chaos. There will be a huge fight. A cold, ruthless half-smile appeared on Grace's lips. She didn't explain the 8 years of resentment. She didn't mention her mother-in-law's abuse, the confiscation of her keys, or her cowardly husband's loan shark debt. A strong woman doesn't need pity. She needs results. You just convey my exact words to the buyer, Grace said, her voice firm, leaving no room for negotiation. Tell them if they agree to this accelerated possession clause, I will personally give them a $2,000 credit at closing for demolition costs. The clearing of the property will be legal. Any disputes that occur at the house after the closing are their problem. The law and the authorities will protect the new title holder. I will have no further connection to it. Tom shuddered. Even as a seasoned real estate shark who had witnessed countless bloody inheritance disputes, he felt a chill at the ruthless, flawless calculation of this seemingly gentle woman. Her mother-in-law must have committed some terrible crime to push her to use such a vicious retaliatory strike, using the new owner's hand to legally evict her own family, uprooting their arrogance completely. All right, I get it, Tom swallowed, wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. I'll talk to the client right away. I bet for a $2,000 discount they'd bring in the mob to clear the house, let alone a construction crew. Good, Grace replied flatly. She took out her phone and, without hesitation, dialed Kevin's number. The phone had barely rung once before he picked up. Kevin's voice was frail and trembling, filled with fear and anticipation, like a lost dog waiting for its master to throw it a bone. Hello? Honey? What's happening? What did the agent say? Did they find a buyer? The Easy Cash guys just sent me another threatening text. Grace held the phone slightly away from her ear to avoid her husband's pathetic panting. She spoke in the commanding tone of a superior, with absolutely no room for compromise. Take Wednesday afternoon off. Bring your original driver's license, social security card, and our marriage certificate. Be at the Sterling Title Company at the downtown intersection at 2 p.m. sharp. The buyer has confirmed the offer of over $475,000. Once it's signed, the cash will be in your account. You'll have money to throw in the loan sharks' faces. Kevin let out a long sigh of relief through the phone, as if an oxygen mask had just been removed from his face. Really, honey? Oh, thank God. Thank you. I'm forever indebted to you. Does Mom know about this? I've taken care of everything, Grace said curtly, cutting off Kevin's cheap excitement. Remember to wear a clean, ironed, long-sleeved shirt. Cover up that pathetic, terrified look of yours. Don't let your appearance screw up my important business. Got it? Got it. Got it. I'll be there on time on Wednesday. I'll do whatever you say. Grace hung up, dropping the phone onto the glass table with a sharp clack. The sound merged with a sudden clap of thunder that tore through the dark clouds outside. Tom had already texted, confirming the appointment with the buyer. The closing was set. The deadly countdown had officially begun. In just 3 days, The bomb that would obliterate the arrogance and greed of the wretched Johnson family would detonate. Tuesday night, the digital clock on the bedside table blinked 10 p.m. The air in the master bedroom was suffocating, as if all the oxygen had been sucked out. The dim yellow light from the night lamp cast flickering shadows on the peeling plaster walls. The ceiling fan turned lazily, its squeaking blades cutting through the silence. Less than 12 hours remained until the 0 hour, the decisive moment at the title company. Grace sat silently in a velvet-upholstered chair, her back as straight and cold as a statue carved from ice. She wore a gray silk pajama set, her long hair falling loosely over her shoulders. On the glass table before her, illuminated by the dim light, lay a pristine white file, still smelling of fresh laser printer ink. It was the legal masterpiece meticulously drafted by Attorney Miller. The door creaked open, and Kevin slipped in, his movements furtive and sneaky, like a thief. He carefully locked the door behind him, let out a sigh of relief, and approached the bed. "Mom and Jessica are fast asleep," he whispered, wiping a sheen of sweat from his forehead. "Tomorrow at 2 p.m., right? I've already told my boss I have a client meeting, so I got the afternoon off. Is the buyer ready with the cash?" Grace didn't respond to her cowardly husband's cheap enthusiasm. She slowly picked up the file from the table and pushed it towards Kevin's side of the desk. Alongside the crisp white papers was a cold, metal ballpoint pen. "Before you sign the sales contract with the buyer tomorrow," Grace began, her voice flat but carrying immense weight, "you need to sign this document first. Right here, right now." Kevin looked confused, his sparse eyebrows furrowing. He hesitantly approached and picked up the paper. Below the bold, capitalized heading, the title of the document struck him like a blow: Post-Nuptial Property Agreement. Kevin's pupils instantly constricted. He quickly scanned the clauses below, his lips moving as he read the numbers. Then, his expression changed dramatically, from pale to flushed red, his eyes widening in disbelief. What is this? 80% of the house's value belongs solely to you, and I only get 20%? Grace, are you crazy? This is joint property. The house is in both our names. By law, it should be split 50/50. Are you trying to take everything? Greed, the ugliest of human instincts, always finds a way to surface, even on the edge of an abyss. Kevin, a man drowning in loan shark debt who had just been on his knees begging his wife to save him, was now bristling like a porcupine, demanding equality the moment he saw his share being reduced. He conveniently forgot that he hadn't contributed a single drop of sweat to build this massive asset. Grace smirked, her smile laced with a deep, cutting irony that dissected her opponent's shamelessness. 50/50? She drew out the words, her tone slow but lethal. "On what grounds do you demand an equal split, Kevin? 8 years ago, I emptied my premarital savings. I broke my back, paying off bank loans and debts to my relatives to buy this house. You contributed a meager $50,000, but your mother forced me to put your name on the deed for the sake of your family's image." She leaned forward, her calm eyes now blazing with long-suppressed fury. "I am giving you 20% of $475,000. That's over $90,000. That's more than enough for you to pay off your $50,000 debt, buy back the car you pawned, and still have $40,000 left over. I am throwing you a gold-plated life raft while you are drowning, and you have the audacity to stand there and haggle over its color? But, Kevin stammered, taking a step back, the paper trembling in his hand. "Mom said we were selling to buy a luxury condo. If I only have $90,000, and she asks where the money for the new place is, what am I supposed to say? She'll get suspicious. Give me 40%. I'm begging you." Kevin's weakness and cowardice had reached a new level of absurdity. He wasn't worried about his own life being threatened by loan sharks. He was worried about not having enough money to cover his lie to his mother. A man who would never grow up, forever hiding behind his mother to suck his wife dry. Grace's patience had run out. There was no need to play the part of the forgiving wife anymore. The time for ruthless psychological dominance had come. "Listen to me very carefully. Kevin Johnson," Grace hissed each word, her face as cold as ancient ice. You have no right to bargain here. Option 1. You pick up that pen and sign this agreement. Tomorrow, we go to the closing, sell the house, you take your 90,000+, pay off your debt, and save your life and your pathetic reputation. Option 2. You don't sign. The sale is immediately canceled. I will pack my things and move out. And you can deal with the easy cash guys and their $50,000, plus a mountain of interest, all by yourself. Kevin stood frozen, a cold sweat drenching his back. His lips moved, but no sound came out. His eyes darted around as if searching for an escape. He was still hesitating, still wanting to squeeze out a little more. Grace said nothing more. She calmly picked up her smartphone from the table. Her slender fingers glided over the screen, the blue light illuminating her cold face. You're hesitating, aren't you? Fine, Grace said flatly, opening her contacts. I'll just call Mom. Last night she said she couldn't sleep because she was worried about your career. She's probably still up watching TV. I'll invite her in to see her darling son's car pawn receipt and read a few of the paint-splattering threats from the loan sharks. Let's see how she handles this debt. The screen displayed Eleanor's number. Grace's finger hovered over the green call button. Wait, don't call Mom, Kevin screamed, a choked sound catching in his throat. The absolute terror of his successful son image, shattering in front of his mother, finally crushed the last bit of his greedy reasoning. He lunged forward like a moth to a flame and snatched the metal pen from the table. I'll sign right now. Just don't tell Mom. She'll kill me. Under the flickering yellow light, Kevin's hand trembled, his knuckles white with fear. The tip of the pen scratched against the paper, making a rushed, frantic sound. The crooked, misshapen signature of Kevin Johnson appeared at the bottom of the page. He had no idea that the blue ink was not a ticket to freedom, but a death warrant, stripping him of all power and the assets his family had clung to for 8 long years. Grace took back the paper, her calm eyes staring at the fateful signature. The pin had been pulled. On her last night in this house, the darkness seemed thicker than usual. When Kevin's steady, carefree snoring began to fill the room, the sound of a man who had shed a great burden, Grace quietly sat up. She didn't turn on the overhead light, only a small desk lamp, dimming it to its lowest setting. The faint light was just enough to illuminate a small corner at the foot of the bed, where brown cardboard boxes sat waiting. Grace began to pack. Her hands moved over her belongings with the decisive gestures of a surgeon removing necrotic tissue. First came her personal documents, awards, work notebooks, and a collection of her own photo albums. She paused for a moment before the wedding photo on her vanity. In the picture, the Grace of 8 years ago was smiling radiantly, her eyes sparkling with faith in a happy home. Grace looked at the woman in the photo, as if looking at a stranger from a past life. A fleeting sense of nostalgia, as thin as smoke, quickly dissipated in the cold reality. She turned the photo face down and placed it at the bottom of a box. There was no pain, no regret, only a strange lightness, as if she had just removed a rusty suit of armor she had worn for too long. Rip! The sound of packing tape tore through the silence of the night. Each wrap of tape around a box was another tie to the name Johnson's daughter-in-law being severed. Grace worked tirelessly and silently. She only took what belonged to her, things she had bought with her own hard-earned money. She left everything else behind. The cheap bedding Eleanor had bought for their wedding, the peeling particle board wardrobe, and the man sleeping soundly in the bed. At 3 a.m., a small moving truck from a service Grace had secretly contacted and paid double to work at this hour parked quietly outside the alley gate. Grace worked in sync with 2 movers, carrying the boxes to the truck without a sound. Watching the truck roll away, disappearing behind the trees at the end of the lane, carrying her new life to the high-end condo she had already rented downtown, Grace stood alone in the yard. The night wind carried the earthy smell of the suburbs and the faint, unpleasant odor from a neighbor's pigsty. She looked back at the bedroom. Through the window, the emptiness was palpable. The vanity now held only a half-used jar of face cream. The wardrobe was missing a large section of clothes, revealing the stained wood paneling inside. It was like the carcass of a house, and tomorrow its last soul would depart. The next morning, as the sun rose, Eleanor woke with her usual need for control. She took the ring of keys she had confiscated from Grace and unlocked the door to her daughter-in-law's room, intending to search for any hidden cash, or at least to scold her for not getting up to make breakfast. "Grace, this is no time to be." The scolding died in Eleanor's throat. She stood frozen in the doorway. The wardrobe was wide open, half empty, with only a few of Grace's old house clothes hanging limply. The corner with the bookshelf and desk was completely bare. Even the small rug by the bed was gone. The room felt hauntingly desolate. Eleanor frowned, her heart pounding with a sense of foreboding. She approached the wardrobe, her hand trembling as she touched the empty hangers. Kevin, wake up. Where did your wife take all her things?" Eleanor's scream tore through the morning quiet, but at that moment, Grace was standing in front of a mirror at her office, calmly applying her brightest red lipstick, preparing for the closing that afternoon. The sound of the neighborhood's morning news broadcast from a loudspeaker mixed with the clatter of dishes in the small kitchen. Eleanor sat enthroned at the head of the dining table, picking her teeth, her small eyes constantly glancing towards Grace and Kevin's bedroom. The emptiness of the wardrobe had unsettled her, but her arrogance quickly suppressed any unease. She reassured herself that Grace had probably just taken her clothes to the dry cleaner or given them to her family, a habit of giving everything away that she often cursed. Grace emerged from the room, dressed in a sharp, cobalt blue business suit, her hair pulled back in a high, neat bun that revealed a composed but stone-cold face. She wasn't carrying a grocery basket or wearing an apron. Instead, a small, silver rolling suitcase stood beside her. "Mom, I'm going on a business trip for 3 days," Grace said, her voice flat. "I'm leaving this morning and will be back at the end of the week." Eleanor dropped her toothpick and let out a mocking scoff. She stood up, slapped her thighs, her voice screeching like metal on metal. "Oh, another business trip. A woman who's always out and about, leaving her poor husband all alone. You act like you're the CEO. If you're going, then just get lost. This house is better off without you. Or is this just another excuse to sneak money to your broke family back home?" Jessica, sitting nearby, chimed in while still engrossed in her phone. 3 days away, she'll probably just come back with a few fake handbags. It's not like she's doing anything important. Let her go, Mom. I'm sick of looking at her anyway. Grace didn't reply. She didn't even glance at the two women, using the cheapest insults to humiliate her. Her contempt for them was absolute, to the point where even a retort felt like a waste of energy. Their curses were now like the buzzing of flies, completely harmless. In contrast to the nonchalance of his mother and sister, Kevin sat at the corner of the table, his face drained of color. His hands trembled as he held his bowl of oatmeal, sweat beading on his temples. Every insult his mother hurled at Grace was like a knife twisting his taut nerves. He knew this business trip was his final ticket. At 2 p.m. at the title company, he would have to sign away his ownership of this house. "Kevin, what's wrong with you today? Why is your face so pale?" Eleanor turned to pat her son's shoulder, her concern feigned. I just stayed up late working on a new project." "I'm fine, Mom," Kevin stammered, avoiding Grace's sharp, piercing gaze. Grace smirked. A subtle, utterly cruel smile. She calmly pulled up the handle of her suitcase, the wheels clattering dryly and decisively on the tiled floor. "I'm leaving now." As Grace walked out, Eleanor stood at the door, shouting one last volley of venomous curses after her. "Just go and don't come back. Don't bring your sour face back here and jinx my son." Clack. The rusty iron gate closed, completely separating the world of the greedy, delusional people inside from the free air outside. A blue taxi was waiting at the end of the alley. The driver quickly got out and helped Grace put her suitcase in the trunk. Grace sat in the back and rolled down the window. From this position, she looked at the house one last time. The mossy walls, the old iron gate she had cleaned for 8 years, it was all just rubble in her plan now. There was no warmth left in her eyes, only the cold precision of a chess master about to make the final move. "Let's go, driver," she said softly. The taxi pulled away, leaving behind a thin trail of exhaust that vanished into the air. Eleanor and Jessica had no idea that as the taxi disappeared, they had officially become homeless on the very land they were so proud of. 1:55 p.m., Sterling Title Company, located at a busy downtown intersection. The sound of car horns blared from the street, seeping into the air-conditioned space. The smell of printer ink and new paper created a solemn, high-pressure atmosphere. Grace sat in a leather swivel chair, her composure strangely serene. She didn't look at her husband, focusing instead on reviewing the thick file on the table. Opposite her, Tom the agent and the buyer, a sharp-looking middle-aged man with glasses, were quietly discussing the wire transfer. Clack! The glass door opened, and Kevin rushed in, breathing heavily, his hair matted with sweat from the harsh sun. He looked around furtively, as if afraid of being followed. When he saw Grace, he froze, his shoulders slumping. "Honey, I'm here," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Sit down. Don't waste everyone's time," Grace said without looking up, pushing the draft of the property agreement he had signed the night before towards him. The closing agent, a woman in her 40s with eyes that seemed to have seen every human emotion through legal documents, pushed 2 official copies of the purchase and sale agreement towards them. "Please review your personal information carefully. If you agree to the terms of transfer and the division of proceeds, please sign and provide a thumbprint on each page." Kevin picked up the pen, its tip hovering over the pristine white paper. He looked at the figure $475,000, the price of his home of 8 years. He looked down at the clause stating Grace would receive 80%, while he would only get 20%. A flash of regret, a surge of greed, made his fingers twitch. "Kevin," Grace called softly, her voice as thin and cold as ice, just loud enough for him to hear. "The Easy Cash guys are waiting for you at your office at 2:30. You either sign this, or I call Mom right now." The psychological pressure from his wife, combined with the terror of the loan sharks, crushed Kevin's last bit of resistance. He closed his eyes, gritted his teeth, and scribbled his name across the pages. His signature was as crooked and misshapen as his character. "Done. It's done," he muttered, his face ashen. It was Grace's turn. She held the pen firmly, her signature flowing yet decisive, without a hint of hesitation. After signing, they both pressed their index fingers onto a red ink pad and then firmly onto the paper. The bright red thumbprints were like seals of fate, ending their ownership of the old house. The agent verified the legalities, meticulously checking their IDs. Everything was executed according to the perfect, karmic plan Grace had orchestrated. All set. The buyer may now proceed with payment. The buyer opened his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The room fell silent, the only sounds being the ticking of the wall clock and the frantic pounding of Kevin's heart. Ping! A notification sounded from Grace's phone. A long string of numbers appeared, plus $380,000. Ping! Kevin's phone chimed as well, plus $95,000. Payment received in full. "The transaction is complete," Tom the agent exclaimed, breaking the tension. Thump, thump, thump. The dry, resounding sound of the official notary stamp hitting the paper was like a starting gun. The contract was now legally binding. The house had officially changed hands. Grace stood up and gathered her things. She didn't spare Kevin another glance. While he was still dazed by the 6-figure sum in his account money he saw as his salvation, Grace had already walked out the door, leaving the name Johnson's daughter-in-law forever buried in a pile of old files. In 3 days, a construction crew would arrive to tear down the iron gate, and Eleanor would receive the greatest shock of her life. The persistent morning rain had finally stopped, giving way to a late afternoon sky painted with the brilliant colors of sunset, reflecting off the gleaming glass of the city's skyscrapers. Grace stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of her high-end condo on the 22nd floor. The wind from the river blew in, gently tousling her shoulder-length hair and the soft fabric of her silk dress. She had never felt so light, as if thousands of pounds of invisible chains that had bound her for 8 years had shattered with the single stamp at the title company. $380,000 sat safely in her bank account, a sum large enough to build a proud new life from scratch. No longer would she have to live by her mother-in-law's whims. No longer would she have to shoulder the debts of a cowardly husband. Grace returned to her new oak desk. On its smooth surface, a single white sheet of paper lay waiting under the warm yellow light. The heading was printed in bold, decisive letters. Petition for dissolution of marriage. She picked up a pen and signed her name with a long, elegant stroke. The blue ink soaked into the paper like a final declaration of independence. No resentment, no curses, no need for a dramatic confrontation. Grace's silence was the most devastating punishment for the Johnson family. She carefully placed the petition into a bright orange express mail envelope. Inside, she included a small note with a few lines written in her sharp, clear handwriting. Kevin, the house proceeds have been divided according to our agreement. Your debt is settled. From this moment on, we owe each other nothing. Don't look for me. The house you are standing in no longer belongs to you anyway. Sign this and send it back to the court. Goodbye forever. Grace sealed the envelope, wrote the address of the old house, and called a courier service. As the delivery person left with the package, Grace poured herself a glass of red wine. She took a small sip. The slightly tart flavor gave way to a sweet aftertaste, just like the end of her marriage. This freedom was incredibly sweet. At the old, single-story house, the late afternoon sun slanted through the window, highlighting the patches of mildew on the walls. Eleanor sat enthroned in her wooden chair, her short legs swinging gleefully. She sipped her tea, smacking her lips. With that Grace gone for 3 days on her business trip, the house feels so much cleaner, so much more peaceful. Jessica, honey, later tonight, let's go get some noodles at the corner shop. I'll give you some money to buy a new dress. Jessica scampered out from her room, her eyes crinkling with a smile. You're the best, Mom. But Kevin has been acting so strange lately, all sneaky like he's a thief. Oh, him? He's just worried about his next promotion. Don't worry about it. As long as I'm here, his future is bright, Eleanor said. Just as she finished her sentence, her spirits soaring, a loud, insistent buzzing shattered the afternoon quiet. Ding dong, ding dong. Eleanor slammed her teacup down, her brow furrowed in annoyance. Who is that? I said no visitors at this hour. Jessica, go see who's ringing the bell like the house is on fire. Eleanor had no idea that the doorbell was the death knell for her arrogance. A package carrying the downfall of the Johnson clan was at her gate, and behind the delivery person stood the shadows of men in construction uniforms, armed with measuring tapes and sledgehammers. The doorbell continued to ring, insistent and urgent. Eleanor got up grudgingly, muttering curses at whoever had ruined her afternoon tea. Jessica followed curiously, her phone still in hand. As Eleanor swung open the iron gate, she froze. It wasn't just a delivery person. It was a group of burly men in hard hats, carrying measuring tapes, sledgehammers, and blueprints. Leading them was a man in a crisp white shirt, the buyer from the title company. Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm here to survey the property and begin demolition of the front retaining wall, the man said curtly, his tone full of the authority of an owner. Eleanor stared blankly for a second, then snapped. She shot up, hands on her hips, her face flushed with anger. What? Demolish what? Are you people crazy? This is my son's house. Who gave you permission to come here and cause trouble? Get out, all of you. Get out before I call the police. Jessica rushed forward, her tongue just as sharp. Are you trying to rob us in broad daylight? Do you know who owns this house? My brother is a very important man. Touch one brick and you'll go to jail. Ignoring the women's screeching, the middle-aged man frowned slightly, motioned for his crew to step back, and slowly opened his briefcase. He pulled out a file, still fresh with new ink, his voice remaining calm but cold. I will say this one last time. I am the legal owner of this house and this land. I have paid the full $475,000 and took possession of the property this afternoon. As per the contract, I have the right to take over and begin renovations immediately. 475,000? Sold the house? The words hit Eleanor like a sledgehammer. Her ears rang, her vision swam. She slapped the file out of the man's hands, screaming hysterically. Lies. You're all a bunch of liars. My Kevin would never sell this house. He said this house was our family's source of fortune. It must be that witch, Grace. She tricked him. She stole my son's house. Eleanor lunged at the man, but the construction workers quickly restrained her. The scene at the gate descended into chaos. Eleanor's curses, Jessica's wailing, and the murmurs of neighbors gathering to watch the drama created a cacophony of noise. Don't make me resort to forcible removal, the man said coldly. He then produced the most important document, the official deed, the certificate of land use rights, already stamped with the transfer of ownership. Look closely, ma'am. The previous owners were Kevin Johnson and Grace Miller. They both signed the sale to me. This is the official seal from the title company and the county clerk. If your family has not vacated the premises within 48 hours, I will call the city marshals and the police to intervene. Eleanor stared at the bright red seal on the deed. The color was like the blood seeping from her greedy heart. Her legs gave out, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She staggered back a few steps and collapsed onto the mossy brick patio. Kevin, where are you? Why did you sell the house? Why would you do this to your mother? Eleanor stammered, her voice lost in a torrent of panic. Beside her, Jessica's face was ashen. The phone slipped from her hand and clattered on the ground. Her dream of a wealthy life, of lording over her sister-in-law, had evaporated into thin air. The house was now a war zone. Eleanor sat slumped on the patio, her white hair disheveled, beating her chest and wailing. The construction crew had already started setting up boundary lines. The sound of a sledgehammer testing the outer wall echoed boom, boom like thunderclaps. Call him. Call Kevin right now. Tell him to come home and kick these robbers out. Eleanor shrieked through clenched teeth, shaking Jessica's shoulder. Jessica fumbled to dial, her lips purple with fear. The number you have dialed is not available at this time. The cold, robotic voice of the automated message repeated for the 50th time. Across the city, Kevin was huddled in a cheap dive bar, his phone turned off, clutching a bag containing the money he had left after paying his debts. He couldn't go home. He was terrified of his mother's wrath, of his sister's contempt, and most of all, of the poverty that was about to descend upon them. He chose the most cowardly path, to run and leave his mother to face the ashes. Knowing she couldn't rely on her son, Eleanor, like a cornered animal, grabbed her old phone and found her daughter-in-law's name. You witch! You devil of a daughter-in-law! You tricked my son! You sold this house! Eleanor screamed curses as she dialed, her tone shifting from sharp to manic. In her high-rise apartment, Grace sat peacefully on her balcony, reading a book, a steaming cup of chamomile tea beside her. Her phone, on the table, buzzed relentlessly. The screen lit up over and over, the missed call count ticking up like a stopwatch. Eleanor was persistent, calling as if it were her last lifeline. She wanted to scream, to demand the money back, to use her mother-in-law authority to force Grace to fix this mess. But Grace just calmly watched the screen, her eyes unblinking. She smiled faintly. The feeling of watching her tormentor scream in helpless fury was exhilarating. For 8 years, Eleanor had called her thousands of times, just to order her around, to criticize her, to demand money. Now, Grace was giving her silence in return, the sharpest weapon to kill any last shred of false hope. Each time the screen went dark and lit up again, Grace took a sip of tea. She knew that in that house, Eleanor was going mad watching the workers tear down the first bricks. She knew Jessica was frantically stuffing clothes into cheap plastic bags as the new owner kicked them out. Grace's phone screen continued to flash frantically. 105 missed calls from mother-in-law, 32 missed calls from Jessica, 15 missed calls from husband. Grace calmly picked up her phone, but she didn't answer. She gently tapped the block number option for every member of the Johnson family, then turned the phone off. The world suddenly became silent. All that remained was the sound of the night wind on the balcony and the steady beat of a heart that had finally found its freedom. The bomb had detonated, and Grace had no obligation to clean up the wreckage for the people who had lit the fuse themselves. The phone screen lit up once more in the quiet apartment. Eleanor's number stubbornly appeared. A final, desperate twitch from a dying creature. Grace leisurely put down her book, her finger gliding over the glass screen as she pressed accept. The moment the call connected, a chaotic, screeching torrent of sound assaulted her ear. Eleanor's deranged screams, Jessica's pitiful sobs, and the thudding of sledgehammers against the house walls. It was the sound of a rotten dynasty collapsing. "You witch! Where are you? Where did you take my son's money? You tricked Kevin into selling the house, didn't you? I'm going to sue you. I'm going to tell the whole world what a disgusting, thieving daughter-in-law you are." Grace didn't interrupt. She let Eleanor vent her fury until her breath became ragged and broken. When only helpless whimpers remained on the other end, Grace began to speak. Her voice was flat and cold, devoid of emotion, but as sharp as a scalpel dissecting a memory. "You forget so quickly, don't you, Eleanor?" Grace said slowly, each word deliberate. "Not long ago, at the dinner table, you said this house was bought entirely with your son's money, that I was just a freeloader who had no right to the Johnson family assets. Do you remember what else you said? You said if I didn't like it here, I should get a divorce and get the hell out." On the other end, Eleanor froze, her sobs catching in her throat. "I'm just a good daughter-in-law, doing exactly as you wished." Grace's lips curved into a slight smile as she gazed at the sparkling city lights below. "You told me to get a divorce, so I filed the papers. You said it was your son's house, and Kevin himself signed the papers to sell it, to pay off his and Jessica's gambling and loan shark debts. Kevin has all that money now. You should be looking for your precious son, not calling a stranger like me." You, Eleanor stammered, her voice trembling violently. "What about your money? You took hundreds of thousands. You have to give it back to buy a new place for us to live. Are you going to throw us out on the street?" Grace laughed, a short, contemptuous sound. "My money is from the sweat and tears I shed paying off the mortgage for 8 years. Now, it will serve my own life. As for you and Jessica, you'd better start packing. The new owners aren't as patient as I am. They paid over $400,000 for the land, not to shelter unrelated people." Pausing for a moment to let the full weight of the collapse sink in on the other end, Grace delivered the final, fatal blow, shattering every last illusion of her mother-in-law authority. "The other day you said, 'If that's the case, then just get a divorce.' I was only following your orders. You and Jessica should get your things. The new owners don't like to wait. In an hour, the moving crew will throw everything onto the sidewalk if you're still there. I hope you and Jessica find a nice place to sleep tonight." Beep, beep, beep. Grace decisively ended the call and casually tossed her old SIM card into the trash. It was a final, definitive act, like throwing away a piece of garbage that had stunk up her youth. She went back inside and put on her favorite instrumental music, leaving Eleanor and Jessica to stand amidst the rubble and their tattered plastic bags of clothes under the dim, lonely glow of a streetlight. The yellow streetlight cast a pale glow on the small alley, once the source of Eleanor's pride. Now, the stark reality was a pile of plastic bags bulging with clothes, a few dented plastic bins, and a chipped tea set scattered on the sidewalk. Eleanor collapsed onto a sack of belongings, her eyes vacant as she watched the crew pull a tarp over the front of the house. Her curses had faded, replaced by whimpers of self-pity. Nearby, Jessica juggled several bags while screaming into her phone, demanding to find her brother and settle the score. This exodus had no fanfare, only recrimination and blame among those who shared blood but were consumed by greed. They eventually found their way to a cramped, damp rented room at the end of the street, where the arrogance of the Johnson family was finally buried. Meanwhile, in a completely different world, in the windswept apartment on the 22nd floor, Grace stood on the balcony, her hair flowing in the cool city breeze. She held her new phone, dialed the familiar number of her parents, and pressed call. "Hello, Dad. Yes, it's me. I've settled everything. I just moved into a new place. It's spacious and bright. I'll come home this weekend to bring you and Mom up for a visit. I've already scheduled a full checkup for you at the International Hospital." Hearing her father's gentle laughter on the other end, Grace felt a sting in her nose, but her lips curved into the most radiant smile she had worn in years. It was the smile of liberation, of a woman who had shattered her own chains to reclaim her life. She was no longer her mother-in-law's money machine, no longer her husband's debt shield. She was just Grace, a free, independent, and proud woman. This battle had no conventional winner, but Grace had conquered her own past submissiveness. Her story closes, but its echo is a stark warning for anyone at the threshold of marriage and family. Remember these 3 things to protect yourself. 1. On finance. Kindness must have a backbone. In marriage, sacrifice is necessary, but blindness is suicide. A woman, no matter how much in love, must maintain control over the assets she creates. Do not let your kindness be exploited as an obligation, and do not let your desire to please turn you into a financial hostage in your own home. Money can't buy happiness, but it represents your dignity and your escape route when love betrays you. 2. On marriage. Do not try to wake someone who is pretending to be asleep. A cowardly husband who hides behind his mother and pushes his wife to the front lines is not worth saving. Do not delude yourself into thinking your endurance will change him. In a toxic relationship, a clean break is the greatest act of compassion you can show yourself. Ending a mistake is not a failure. It is the beginning of the right journey. 3. On self-worth. You are the one who sets the price for your own life. If you treat yourself like a cheap commodity, others will trample on you. If you affirm that you are a diamond, the world will have to respect your brilliance. A woman's value is not measured by an award for good daughter-in-law, but by the courage to say no to injustice and to stand up for herself when she is wronged. Grace's journey is complete. Are you ready to take the wheel of your own life?